Friends, this is Jeff. Lots of fun stuff coming up as we head into the summer. We have just 20 spots left for our June workshop. 60 of us are gathering in Colorado on June 27th and 28th, and we would love to have you. For our friends who can't make it, we will, at popular request, begin hosting our monthly online gatherings again sometime this summer. And as many of you know, our book will release at the end of June. All the links for all of this stuff are going to be at aroundthecircle.org. Sign up for a membership. You'll get all the updates. Friends, we're glad you're here, and may all good things be yours. I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly, I'm taking my time. All I like at talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name is Jeff Cook. I'm a longtime professor of philosophy in Greeley, Colorado. And with me is Ashton Whitmoyer-Ober. She is a professor, has a master's degree in community psychology and social change from Penn State, and teaches at York College. Ashton is the author of several Enneagram books, including The Enneagram Made Simple, Enneagram for Relationships. She is a mom. She is apparently a lover of pink, and she is a bona fide rock star on social media. And she's going to be hosting a 7-week online training for using the Enneagram in the workplace here soon. And we are thrilled to have her. So welcome.
Thank you so much for that. Quite an introduction. I appreciate being here.
You had so much stuff to boast in, and I was like, all of this is really important, so we need to make it happen.
It makes my palms sweat like the Enneagram 2 that I am.
Good. Well, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to make you uncomfortable. Because Ashton has got this online training coming up about Enneagram at work, we wanted to talk about each of the types and how they function at work. And this is a topic that TJ and I have hit in the past, but probably not for 2 or 3 years. And it's one that's so helpful, important, just one of the many places Enneagram can get used and really needs to be discussed. So I'm thrilled that you are also into this topic.
Very passionate about it.
Good. Tell me why.
So I was actually thinking about that this morning. I was like, how did this land for me where, I sort of became just obsessed with how people can use the Enneagram in their workplaces specifically. But really, it goes back to relationships as a whole for me. I've always just been so intrigued by the way that people work together or the things that they struggle with, whether that be in romantic partnerships or in friendships, and specifically in workplaces. And for the past 6 years, I've been working for myself. And so I haven't been in a traditional workplace setting. But prior to that, I was kind of the observer in a workplace, watching why some people experienced drama and why some people really struggled to receive feedback, and just taking all of this information. And when I discovered the Enneagram, it gave a language to the things that I was witnessing.
Yeah, agreed. I would be curious, just talking about relationships in general, when you think of the differences in relationships, romantic relationships, parental relationships, you're a mom. I suppose your kid, you have a 2-year-old, is that right?
2 and 4, yeah.
2 and 4-year-old. Mm-hmm. Then your friendships and then your work relationships. Do you see Enneagram changing much as you bounce from relationship to relationship? Or is it the case, does it take on a different kind of face depending on the environment? Or do you see that it's more static and uniform?
I definitely think it takes on different, and maybe is that because of the specific types that are more prone to be chameleonistic, if that's a word. But
Sure.
what I see changing is how kind of the motivations of each type present themselves in those relationships. Whereas the way that my two-ness shows up with my friends is going to be different in the way that it shows up with, my husband or my family members. But specifically, I see like the levels of health, right? I think that the levels of health are complex and, not talked about often. But, people always just think like I'm either a healthy version of my type or I'm an unhealthy version of my type. And they don't really understand like what goes into that and how that can ebb and flow, how that maybe in this relationship, you are an unhealthy type, but in this relationship, you're a healthy version of your type, and how those things can change and change with time in relationships as well.
I think that's an excellent answer. One of the things I just started to discover was I've started working with a woman who's a 3, and I'm married to a 3.
Okay.
And the boundaries that I obviously in a romantic relationship, like the walls, I've never experienced my wife putting up kind of the same sort of distancing that I experience with this new relationship with a 3, where I'm like, oh, you're actually incredibly warm, but I can actually feel a very, very clear delineation between here's my warmth and what I'm offering you and myself, which I never have experienced before. So I don't have a lot of 3 relationships. And so this was like a new epiphany for me recently where I'm like, oh, this is a thing, which is entirely fine. Like 3s, you should create boundaries with people.
Right.
But it was one of those things, relationship versus work. I'd never experienced that. So
I think too, for, not to talk about me, but I think for 2s,
please do.
Well, 2s just like, in general, stereotypically, they struggle to communicate their needs and their desires. And, they do that because they're afraid that they aren't going to be needed or loved by other people. But in some relationships, like people come to me and they say, I relate to these things about the 2, but I can totally, express what I need at any given point. And to me, that depicts like a comfortability in that relationship. And it doesn't mean that you're any less of a 2 or that you're not a 2. It's just that relationship dynamic is different. And so I don't think that we talk about relationships as a whole often when it comes to the Enneagram. We just talk about what that type stereotypically looks like in a relationship.
Yes, that's well said. One of I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you today because my favorite, one of the few things that I really am intrigued by is 2s take on other people's emotional life. I think that 2s generally have the best vocabularies for this and the best insights into other numbers differently from, I'm so used to talking to TJ, who 9s also have this superpower, but 2s have it in a different kind of way, which I'm always incredibly grateful for. So I'm thrilled. So no pressure, by the way.
Yeah. Palms back to sweating.
Well, speaking of 2s in the workplace, and this is a good place to start because 2s, at least in my understanding, 2s can sometimes have a difficult time self-evaluating. And since you've done the work, I imagine you're going to be more aware of what it looks like when you enter into workplace settings. When you think about 2s in the workplace, what comes to your mind first?
Relationships. Like they're just so focused on the relationships within the workplace. And I think that's why I've gotten into this work clearly, because I care so passionately about people having healthy workplace relationships. I think that it blows my mind when people tell me that they just don't, they go to work and they don't really invest in the people in the workplace and then they leave. And I'm like, how is that even possible? And so when I think about 2s in relationships, it is sensing the needs of the people, whether that be you needing to take something off of their plate, or you need to help them prevent burnout, or you need to help facilitate conversations. Like it's just focused in on the people versus the tasks. And not saying that 2s don't focus in on the tasks and the things that need to be completed. It's just, how am I supportive of the people in process of doing the things that are expected of me in the workplace?
Yeah, I love that. I've spoken with a 7 buddy of mine about how sometimes heart types are often playing a game that the rest of us don't see. That there's there's emotional dynamics. It's almost as though you have a different spectrum for visibility, and you can understand the relational dynamics at play, where the rest of us are kind of walking through life fairly oblivious to how the nuances are being played out. And that's been my experience recently with working with 2s, is that I think they're testing me on this, and I don't understand what's going on, but I hope I'm playing this hand well. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
If you can speak to that.
And I think
wisdom,
that it's unfortunately a manipulative. It can be used in a manipulative way, which we know this about 2s, right? We sometimes don't talk about that with 3s and 4s, but in general, they are. It's a connection to identity, right? For anybody in the heart triad. So, they're constantly vigilant about how they're being perceived. And so when that comes into play, but I think that authenticity is always coming in to play with this as well. What's interesting about the 3s is what I was going to say is they do struggle with presenting themselves as who they are, but they expect other people to be doing that. Right. And so when it comes to their emotions and receiving other people's emotions in return, they're hyper aware of what they're seeing in other people while masking their own emotions to other people, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Love the idea of being vigilant about how you're perceived. That's a fantastic line. And pings for me.
Yeah, it's something that is just constantly coming up for the heart triad is, being aware of how I need to present myself a certain way so that other people see me a certain way.
Shorthand for me is always that, the 2s, 3s, and 4s are attention seekers, but the way that's phrased in terms of it's more than this. It's a studied almost, you have a strong radar for yourself as it's going outward toward others, I assume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I completely lack this. I have zero skill on this front.
You aren't alone.
No.
And it's actually painful for me sometimes when people aren't it's not being self-aware, but it's I think there's a difference between being self-aware and aware of themselves. So,
talk about that.
Being self-aware is noticing these tendencies about yourself, but having an awareness of self, I think, is how you are being perceived to other people. So, right. A lot of people who aren't in the heart triad, I'm not saying everybody, right? But a lot of people who don't have this skill set are kind of just not caring as much. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's just a fact of life. And for me on this end, I'm like, wow, that must be amazing. How can you just go through life, without really caring how you're being perceived? That has to be so freeing. Whereas I don't want to speak for all of the heart triad, but it's so emotionally draining to have this vigilance.
Yeah. I promise you I have my own issues. So perhaps we'll get to those at the end of this list.
Perhaps.
But I love the distinction there. There's a huge difference between self-awareness of your interior life and an awareness of how you are projecting. Mm-hmm. That's a fantastic distinction there. We had talked off mic, Ashton and I, about each of the types and how they solve problems is one of the places I primarily see Enneagram being used in workplace. And when it comes to 2s, I have all sorts of thoughts here, but where do you see problem solving emerging for you as a 2 when things break?
I feel like I'm redundant with this, but it's relationship focused first, right? So the problem solving is going to be, how do we focus on fixing the relationships, and then whatever the problem is will solve itself. One of the things that I talk to when I'm working in, whether it be corporate or in team building workshops, etc., is everybody has problems in the workplace. Like there's always a problem and there are always solutions. And how we get from the problem to the solution is going to be different based on your Enneagram type. And so for twos, when they're faced with these problems or they're looking at the problems, they're thinking not just like it's on me to fix this because they're the two, right? They're the helper and they're the fixer, but also that it must be my responsibility to focus on the relationships because nobody else is doing that.
As you're talking, I don't know that I've thought through this. When I think of those who kind of set the problem aside and focus on the relationship first, the numbers that come up to my mind first are 4s, 6s, and 8s who seem to pivot to a spot where they want to find out who sees them, who's on their team, who's going to be in it for the long haul moving forward. And I don't naturally lump 2s in there, but I think that's another kind of, it's an overlap as you're speaking. I'm like, oh, they do this as well.
Well, I think it's because, for 2s, the difference is, and I hate to say this because I am a 2, is the self-serving point of it.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
Is like if I focus in on being this person, right, who focuses on the relationships to fix the problem, how is this reflecting back on me? Whereas for the 4s and the 6s being the loyalty piece of that, and the 8s, it's the protecting piece. It's just showing up differently for 2s.
Yep. I suppose I would want to push into that side as well. That it feels to me like 2s in solving problems in my mind are everything's going to be okay. I'm here and we're all in this together kind of spirit. So it's not necessarily about the problem solving, as you were saying. Right. What's taking place in problem solving is I need to shore up the positivity, the energy, the connectedness. And if we get that, then we can move forward together in a workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bang. Anything else we're saying about 2s in the workplace?
Just, the things that 2s might struggle with in the workplace the most because they are so focused on relationships is sometimes boundaries within those relationships. I always say that 2s don't really differentiate workplace relationships from personal relationships. It's like they view all relationships the same. And so like that's fine in some workplaces, but this is what I tend to see in some of those more corporate workplaces where there do need to be boundaries set in place or if there are types, for example, 5s or other types who just might have stronger boundaries, right? Working with a 2 specifically can be difficult because 5s are kind of putting up those walls and having those strong workplace boundaries, whereas 2s are like, you're my friend because we are working together. And so some of those experiences can be difficult for the 2s in the workplace.
I think that's an excellent word. I had one last question for you on 2s on this front. I've traditionally heard that 2s fall into that camp with 5s and 8s where they expect rejection in relationships, but that's often not seen by the rest of us. I don't know if that pings for you as true. And if it does, I was hoping that you could talk about that in terms of workplace environment.
Yeah, that definitely pings true to me. And I feel like it's almost like we're all in until we're not. So, and I think that's because always in the back of our head, it's like that fear of being unloved, right? And so it's something that we're going to say or do or not do is going to cause this rejection, right? And so in the workplace, it's constantly, again, like highly vigilant of what am I doing and am I going to be rejected for what I'm doing? And then it just is keeping up with this endless cycle of I have to keep doing, I have to keep showing up, I have to keep trying to make people like me because if I don't do these things in the workplace, then I could be rejected.
Well said. I find, and this may be, so I have a theory on 1s, 2s, and 6s. I feel like we sometimes have a hard time connecting because so often we're responding to one another's energy and creates a chess game that nobody's actually moving a first piece, as it were. With the 2s in my life, I feel like it's actually hard for me to get in close. I read all this stuff about 2s wanting relationships, and then I have a difficulty connecting with the 2s in my life. And it's one of those things where I start saying, I wonder what's wrong with me that I can't connect with these 2s when apparently they're willing to help and they never help me, or sort of thing. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but I link it with this, that there is that wall, as it were, of self-protectiveness that may even go unnoticed by 2s when self-describing. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but that would be my take.
I would say that most 2s probably don't know that they are as guarded as they are.
Right.
I think that 2s often think that, like, oh, I'm an open book and I will share all these things with people and I'm willing to help anybody, anytime, any place. But what they are, that fear is like an unconscious fear sometimes of, if I open up, then I could be, it's opening up for rejection, or it's opening up for an ability for people to not like me. And so I think that they are often guarding themselves without realizing that they're doing so. All of that to say, going back to something that you said about like the helper, I don't personally identify with the helper. I think it's a dumb title. Yeah. I think that I am helpful, but I don't think that I am a helper. And I think for a long time, I'm sure I'm not the only one that could say that family and friends didn't see me as being a 2. My sister, my Enneagram 8 sister specifically, would say, like, you're not a helper. And I am choosy with who I help. And I think that for a long time, they thought that I was a 3 based on my behaviors. And I do identify a lot with a 3. I have a very strong 3 wing. But I am helpful, but not just going to do whatever possible if it means that I could be at risk for rejection.
Yeah. We can start a support group on those who think that the traditional monikers for the types are severely lacking.
Yes, so I know.
I'm not a perfectionist. A philosopher that I am, reject the idea of perfection itself. So, but I find very helpful because pointing towards motive in the 2, it may express itself very differently than, as you were saying.
And to not, open a can of worms, so to speak, but it's often why I thought I was a self-preservation 2, because I was like, well, I am able to communicate my own needs and I don't feel the need to constantly be helping other people. So am I kind of the counter type of the 2? I realized after deep work that I am social 2, and so I am not. I just think that the motivations present themselves differently in my life.
Yeah. Book just came out. What is it? Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers on dominant instincts in the workplace. But that's another, like, going down that road. I don't have any aversion to talking a little bit about subtypes and instincts, but I do think that one of the most helpful places that you can talk about that is how do you relate to your work environment.
For sure.
Bang. So I'm a bonding sexual 1. I consistently fail at work in places where I have to do stuff with multiple people at a time. And the places that I really thrive is in one-on-one communication and connecting and all the rest, and just helpful to know that.
Yeah, I think that that's a huge piece that's missing in the kind of the conversations and the dialogues, because and people, even within teams, let's say, where the other week I was working with a team that was mostly 3s and mostly 1s. Right. But when you're looking at all of these 3s and they're still thinking, but we have trouble communicating, but we're all the same type. So shouldn't we be more on the same page? And so that's when some of those things come into play where, okay, what type of 3 are you, you know? And I think that it's a really good point that your sexual threes are going to value more of that one-on-one connection and having more of those personal conversations, or at least having time to do that. Whereas, you know, some of the other types might, the self-preservation three is like, let me bury my head in work and like deal with the conversations later. But not every type is going to respond that way.
Imagine, especially, so dear listener, two things actually. One, that book I reference is by Hubbard and Zartman. Our good friend, Ashton and I have a friend, Tyler Zach, who's doing a conference on subtypes and instincts actually this summer, which we'll promote more. So if you're looking for more on this, well worth looking them up. I imagine when it comes to the instincts, and maybe this can just color the rest of our conversation, but for attention-seeking types, for heart types, if you're social, sexual, or self-preserving in your type, that really is going to affect how your motive is expressed, because it's either going to target the group, it's going to target an individual, or the self-protective side comes in. 2, 3s, 4s, I want to say are all the counter type, aren't they? But if I'm wrong, sorry. But but is it not the case that the sort of attention that a social 2 would be seeking versus a sexual 2 would be seeking is going to be very different?
Oh yeah, for sure. I was on the type 2 panel. So
good.
Yeah. So what's interesting is it was very interesting for me to hear just how different my two counterparts, you know, like I do this work day in and day out, but hearing from real people is so valuable because, you know, I get stuck in my own social 2 head sometimes, like we all do, and how I present myself based on being a social 2, but having my 2 motivations be aligned to the group and how I am collectively wanting to make sure that I belong to a group. Whereas other 2s, you know, don't often feel that need. They still obviously, everybody wants to belong, but it's not that big of a draw to them as it is to myself. And in the workplace, you can see that very clearly because, you know, social 2s in the workplace are going to want to belong to the workplace itself, the environment itself, as well as the people in the group.
It's well said. I share that intuition that I think the type I don't understand most are self-pres ones, and it's in my same motive, but the motive is expressed so differently sometimes that I'm like, okay, I can see how you get there. However, that's good. We've transitioned to 3s a handful of times, but not explicitly 3s in the workplace.
I know, right? I feel like I've been bouncing back and forth. You know, I really also hate these stereotypes because 3s often, you hear about 3s being defined by the work that they do. And I get people that come to me and they say, but I don't work in corporate America. I'm a 3 and I'm a stay-at-home mom, or, you know, I'm a 3 and I don't align with needing to like tie my value into what I'm doing. And I'm like, well, like, it's just so much more than that. And do we see some 3s who exhibit the qualities that I just stated? Yes, of course. But we also see 3s who are just wanting to be valued, and they're just wanting to be respected. And that's their fear of failure, but it has nothing to do with work, right?
Right.
And so I think it's important to talk about both sides of that, right? And in the workplace specifically, you know, people are going to assume, if they know these stereotypes, that they're going to be the ones who are, you know, working, and have an inability to shut their laptops down at night because they are tying their value into what they're doing. But what people are missing when they assume that is who they are at the core, and that, you know, it's just so much deeper than what they're presenting on the outside. Like I mentioned before, you know, 3s do have a hard time being in the horror triad specifically. They're going to have a more difficult time showing their emotions, but it's because they sometimes have a difficult time identifying their emotions because they're showing up as who other people need them to be. And so for them, it gets a little cloudy of like, am I actually being my authentic self? Or do people expect me to be a certain way? And I think that's where they can get in trouble in the workplace, is when there are all of these expectations on who they're supposed to be in that environment, that they have this identity, I don't want to say crisis, but identity confusion on like, okay, what am I actually supposed to be doing?
Love that. To spin back to instincts for just a minute, it strikes me that threes are one of those types that the stereotype can really cloud how we see threeness itself, because threes who are more social can oftentimes be so dominant in their attention seeking. If you hear that they're a three, and they may tell you that they're a three, that, then you're like, oh, okay, this is what threeness looks like. Whereas like I have a handful of self-preserving threes who are friends who don't come across like that at all. In fact, are seem to be quite reserved in their posture. But I think you're right in terms of putting your thumb on what's actually going on within the heart of a three when they're in the workplace. That is very different from how they present.
Right.
Bing. Problems being solved. This can be kind of the wheelhouse for some threes. And what do you see in terms of threes solving problems?
I mean, they're focused on the end goal, right? They're focused on the result. And so because of that, sometimes they get ahead of themselves and they kind of are pushing through kind of the steps of what need to be done in order to get to the solution, which is great if, it's an easy problem to be solved or an easy solution, but sometimes they can rush the process, right? And, one of the things that I always say, the difference between ones and threes is threes don't really mind cutting corners. And that's definitely seen in problem solving, is they're going to do what they have to do to get to the end goal as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Of all things, I was going to draw out the distinction between twos and threes, because this is a sphere difference, that the two is really going to care about the emotions of the people around them when a problem emerges, and the emotions of others can be a real obstacle for the three when solving a problem. And that can be one of those places where like twos and threes, I think are the easiest to mistype.
I agree. Yeah. Whereas, threes are, I mean, I don't want to collectively speak for threes, but, they're so focused on time and efficiency. And so oftentimes they feel like emotions are going to get in the way of the ability to be efficient.
And you had put that forth earlier in terms of what is the face that you are putting out to the community in order to get the attention that you desire. And it's going to be tied to that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
In terms of, I assume, what the three themselves values. So I suppose threes also are giving themselves attention and spinning a story for themselves at times.
Yeah.
And all that comes into play here in problem solving. The one last thing I wanted to say about threes in the workplace is just how threes, in my experience, can wed their own identity to the identity of the group that they're part of. That may not be all threes, but it just has been the case for me. The threes that I've been close to, it can be very quickly, they can move into your success is important because it's my success as well.
Yeah.
Kind of posture.
Yeah. And it's that ability to kind of merge into who they need to be. And, sometimes that looks like being charismatic. And sometimes that looks like being a hard worker. And sometimes it looks like being motivated. But it's because who is around them that's expecting those things from them.
I don't know that I've heard the word merge used with threes, but when you said it, it pinged for me. And it goes across it goes through 3, 6s, and 9s, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
All three of them are merging, but for different reasons.
Yeah, definitely for different reasons, definitely for different motivations, like we mentioned. But that ability to kind of, and it's all going to be focused on expectations, right? It's just, what does expectations itself, like what does that mean to a 3 versus what does that mean to a 9? And what is the consequence if the expectations aren't met.
Yeah. Yep.
And for 9s, it looks like, there could be conflict if the expectations are met. And for 3s, it's, well, I'm not going to be perceived as being valued or competent. And therefore, I need to meet those expectations.
Yeah. In terms of workplace, for 3, 6s, and 9s, is going to jump ahead a little bit. But I always see these types being the space creators. They're creating atmospheres for others that are either the successful looking space, the safe space, or the space that is calm. And as you were saying, when chaos comes in for the 9, or when when the team is looking like losers for the 3, for when things just aren't safe and stable for the 6, the detachment comes in there. Mm-hmm. And that runs across those 3 in my mind. Is in the workplace, those 3 will quit their jobs when, and detach when we're not successful enough, safe enough, or, it's just chaotic. Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. With 6s having the most difficult time quitting jobs, which again, jumping ahead a little bit, but 6s feeling that sense of loyalty and having just a hard time separating that from like their needs. And that could be workplace, that could be relationships, that could be, so many different things that they should be leaving and they can't because that sense of loyalty is just so strong.
And on the opposite side, don't trust themselves to go it alone sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. Or to make the jump, or make, whatever that looks like for them.
Right. There it is. 4s in the workplace.
4s in the workplace, it's so important for 4s to feel, and there's that like feeling word again, but to feel connected to the things that they're doing. And so when they're doing the work, they're going to feel like a personal piece to that. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, it's sometimes tied to passion, like the word passion, but passion is different than almost like a calling to them. But they're going to feel that connection piece to the work that they're doing. And so it's important for them to almost like be reminded of that, so that they can continue to feel that they're making a difference, or that they belong. For 4s, a lot of that is feeling like they belong, feeling like they're important, feeling like they're significant, and that they matter in the workplace. Which is why, for 4s and 2s and 3s, but for 4s, that feedback can be really difficult, especially if it's any sort of criticism or constructive feedback, because they feel like it's a personal attack, because everything is super personal for them in general in the workplace.
Yeah. In my mind, 4s are going to have the hardest time being in traditional work environments, because they need to be distinct, and yet work environments are about being part of a team. Right. And those at some level are going to be contrary values. And I end up working real well with 4s, but again, sexual subtype that I am, I prefer to go to them one-on-one and meet them where they're at in terms of like the work that we're doing. But in those communal spaces, my experience has been that 4s will, it's the need to be seen as different when you're trying to create cohesion, uniformity, teamwork, as it were, that can be tricky, it seems to me. Yeah,
it seems almost like counterintuitive because, when I work with teams, I would say, I'm thinking back to the teams that I've worked with, what's interesting is I don't think I've ever worked with a team that had more than one 4. And so then even more so, it's like I am this black sheep standing by myself. Everybody else appreciates this cohesion, but like I still kind of want to be a little bit different. But where they struggle with is, when feeling like something is wrong with them because they're so different. And then when they feel that something is wrong with them, then it just continues this like self-isolation. even though they like want to be a little bit different, but they just don't want something to be wrong with them. And so a lot of work, what it is when working with fours is meeting them where they're at and encouraging like their individual unique voice and how that belongs on a team.
Yep. Well said. Always strikes me, just as a side note, that 1s, 4s, and 7s are the loneliest of the types. And it's because of this. The idealism for 1s, 4s, and 7s pull you into individual spaces. And in a work environment, like trying to carve out your spot can be tricky, unless it's the case you have more of that, that social instinct.
Right. But even so, like I think about 7s, again, jumping ahead, it's hard not to. But I think about, 7s and often just how different they look in the workplace, and 7s, stereotypically, we think of them as social people, but not always. And I think that is just important to remember, is that they're also just trying to find their place on the team or their place in the workplace, and not making those assumptions about the people that you're working with.
Lots to say about 7s, and we can hold it for when we talk about 7s. 4s, last thing on 4s is how they solve problems. We kind of had mentioned it, but where does your mind go with 4s and solving problems?
What's interesting about the 4s is, they could have that strong 5 wing, right? So it's going to be different for those who do have that connection to the 5 versus those who don't. 4s are trying to create meaning from experiences, so they're going to look for the meaning in the problem itself, right? And those who have the connection to the 5 are going to naturally lean into problem solving a little bit more than those with the 3 wing. And that's because we'll talk about that when we get to the 5s. But so when they're working through those problems, it's again similar to the 2s, where it's going to be focused on kind of the emotions of the problem, or what people are feeling in that moment versus actually solving the problem itself.
That's where my mind goes also, is that if the house burns down and you need to rebuild the house, the 4 probably isn't the one you want to turn to.
Right.
If the house burns down and you lost all of your most treasured possessions, the 4 is exactly the person you want to turn to.
Well, what's funny that it's funny that you say that, because one activity that I do when I'm working with teams is related to the structure of building the house, like the problem solving of what each triad looks like when they have the role to play. And the 4s are definitely not making the plans to build the house. They're focused on what's going into that house.
There is something brilliant here, it seems to me, in terms of 4s and problem solving, where there's I'm loving you the way I want to be loved. It seems to me with 4s and problem solving that there's so much extension of how are you feeling in this moment. But there is similar, I think, to 2s, a desire for that to be reciprocated.
Really?
Once you ask me how I'm doing in this, I want to be seen in the midst of this problem as well. But creating that environment can be very valuable. Did you watch The Pit by chance?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
There is a 4 character who is when everything breaks, you go to the social worker.
Yeah.
And you're like, seriously, this has gotten so screwed up. We're bringing in this 4, and it's no longer about solving the physical problems. This person has clearly died a horrific death, and so you bring in the social worker to say, let me show you how to grieve. And
that poor social worker.
That's why I say that.
It's a long shift. Long shift for that social worker. For all of them.
By the way, if you haven't seen The Pit, you gotta see The Pit.
It's
The
a
Pit
good
was,
show.
It
was done really well.
We watched the pilot and then set it aside for 3 weeks. And then we came back and watched the rest of the side. Because just the pilot was overwhelming. It's like, okay, we got to know what we're doing before we jump into this sucker.
Yeah, that's fair.
Anyway.
It's fair. We watched it every week. And
Oh, you were watching it as it was releasing?
Yeah.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
We binged it, which was
That's a lot.
A little, it takes you to some places in terms of your, like, I'm dreaming about emergency rooms.
Yeah, I bet you were.
Yeah,
I bet you were.
Fives in the workplace. I have lots of opinions. What do you think? What comes to your mind?
I think similar to fours, where they not struggle to be on a team, but it's not their first instinct, right? Is to like belong on a team. And it's because they're so wired to be independent thinkers, doers, feelers, right? That they just naturally kind of prefer to do things by themselves. I always say when, working with fives in a in-person workplace, traditional workplace setting, it's important that you kind of give them warning that they're going to be approached. You're going to approach them because they need that time to like plan and prepare for whatever is about to come their way. And so when it comes to problem solving, that's where they really shine. Like I feel like the fives, the sixes, like problem solving is their kind of bread and butter of who they are. But when it comes to the problem solving for the fives, like they do prefer to map it out in their head before they present it to other people.
When I love working with fives because I can't problem solve, but I can get stuff done. So if you just aim me at the things I need to do.
Just tell me what I need to do and then I'll do it.
Here it is. So the five, you bring the five in and you say, okay, give me your assessment.
Yeah.
The other thing I see with fives, and my youngest is a five, is that work is not a place of connection. Work is a place to get work done. And they are there for a very different reason, right?
And that's kind of what I was alluding to before with if a 5 and a 2 are working together, like for 2s, it's the opposite. Like work is a place for just another place that I gain connection from people. And I have these relationships that I foster. And for 5s, they're like, one story that I can think of specifically is when I was working in a traditional workplace setting and I had a coworker who was a 5. And on Monday morning, I'm like, tell me everything that you did this weekend. Like, I need to know where you went to eat, what you did, or the shows that you binged. Like, I just want to know everything about your day or about your weekend. And I would say, tell me about your weekend. They'd be like, it was good. And then that was the end of the conversation. And I'm like, I'm craving more. I need to know more. And then they wouldn't ask me anything about my weekend, which I didn't have the language of the Enneagram at that moment. But now that I can look back and think about the places that I worked and the people that showed up, it's just so, I wish that I did, right? And I think that's probably why I'm so passionate about it too, is like it could save me as a immature, unaware Enneagram 2 from being like, wow, they hate me because they don't want to know about my weekends. But they're there to work. They're not there to find out about how each other's weekends went.
One that I walk into my philosophy department and I'm surrounded by the 5s, and I'm trying to make my way as an adjunct, trying to connect, and I can't connect with people relationally, especially philosophers. They're the worst for exactly this reason. So it's like, how do you connect? I'm going to show interest in your work. However, when I show interest in your work, as was said, they often take it as a diminishment of their energy. So I can't connect to you through asking you what your opinions are. I can't connect to you through being relational. It's like, how do I connect to this person? And the way that you connect is apparently you leave them alone.
Yeah, leave them alone. And then they're like, oh, this feels great.
I love Jeff. He never bugs me.
Yeah.
But with the problem solving, we have already hinted at 5s can be really fantastic at problem solving in terms of moving the ball forward because of shutting down the emotion, addressing the true issue at hand, and even getting a little active in addressing it.
Yeah. And it's really where they love that part. And it's often why we see a lot of 5s in roles that kind of require that problem solving. Even, with philosophers, it's like they're solving some sort of problem, probably on a daily basis, and probably thinking it through. And I think that where 5s get in trouble sometimes is where those thoughts don't like resurface, right? Like they're keeping them in their head. And so then people make assumptions that things aren't actually being solved, but they're like, oh no, I actually already did solve that. I just didn't communicate that. And so communication can sometimes be challenging for fives because they make a lot of assumptions.
Yep. You're giving philosophers way too much credit. Actually,
trying to be nice. I'm a 2.
In the similar way to 2s expecting rejection in relationships, I assume this about 5s as well, although they may not tell you this, but that's my assumption. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that that's why they don't engage a lot, is they already feel like it's not so much rejection from other people. It's like rejection of self too. Mm-hmm. Like if I engage, I'm like rejecting the needs that I have, which are to conserve my energy, etc. And so I think rejection just takes on a different kind of meaning for 5s.
Mm-hmm. That external energy for 2s, 5s, and 8s, I want to just name that so much of it is relational coming from the 2. So much of it is intuitive presence from the 8. But from the 5, it's all observation. Mm-hmm. It's like there's so much observation coming outward. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that inner side can be very difficult to assess. In getting into Enneagram work, 2s and 5s routinely were the hardest for me to understand. And it feels like it comes out of this.
Yeah. What's so, like, I mean, I mentioned this multiple times, just how different 2s and 5s are, but it's just so crazy that they can be so different and also so similar.
Yep. This is, I don't know if you, are you married? I don't know about your personal life.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what type is your...
He's a 6.
Partner. He's a 6. Perfect. Not that the 2s and 5s seem to me to be a common relationship.
Yes.
That I see for the reasons that you're saying. Mm-hmm. So different, and yet in the places that matter romantically, there's real overlap. Mm-hmm. And this is one of them. I expect to be rejected. You expect to be rejected. But if we intuit that or understand that about one another, it actually softens the relationship. Yeah, in a way. I agree. Ashton, it's been fantastic having you.
It's been so
and you're
fun.
doing a workshop. You want to tell us the skinny on your 7-week online training.
Yeah, so I created my new program, the Enneagram Advantage, because I found myself going into workplaces and not just teaching about like the team dynamics. I think that also has a really important place, but I was teaching people how they can then use that knowledge with other teams or use that knowledge with their clients. And so I thought there must be a better way and a more accessible way to reach more people. And so I created a 7-week program that teaches people just that, how to use the Enneagram in their workplace with their clients, with their coworkers and things like that. And we kick off on May 29th. So I'm really excited about it. It's brand new and it's been super fun to develop.
Bang, May 29th. We are putting all links to this in the show notes, so do look. If somebody signs up, what should they expect?
We're gonna meet every week, and so it's going to be training and then coaching. So training, where I'm going to train you on specific areas of the Enneagram, as well as how to kind of teach the core concepts, and then we're going to have some coaching in between.
Well, she's Ashton Whitmoyer-Ober. She has been a treasure to us, a gift to us. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I'm cheering for your work, cheering for all the good things that you're putting into the world.
Thank you. It's been so great to be here.
And I suppose I'm Jeff Cook. Friends, who you aren't just isn't interesting.